No papers, no fingertips, no faces. They were clean-shaven, General, quite literally.
Yeah, I'm Michael Apted, and I'm the director of Gorky Park. So Gorky Park came to me because it was a big best-selling book, and it was clearly going to be made in Europe, and I am a European director. I spend half my time in Los Angeles, half my time in Europe, and so I was, I suppose, a contender, to do the job, and that's how I got it. But the challenge of the film wasn't so much the novel, because I'm sure the basis of the story was there. There was probably too much stuff in it that we had to cut out. But the real challenge was, how are we going to shoot it? How are we going to make it look believable in the Soviet Union? Because that was so intriguing about the novel. And so anyway, we went on a scout and asked permission to shoot the film there. And they read the book, and they ummed and ahed a lot. They made it quite difficult for us when we were scouting, and then they threw us out of the country. They said, you can't make the film here because crime does not exist in Russia. So how could you make a thriller about people being murdered? Because that doesn't happen. I'm a sort of documentarian at heart, and I love to have real things as the sources of inspiration. In some ways, I felt rather uneasy about the whole film because I didn't have enough, as it were, references to be able to deliver what I knew people wanted, which was life in the USSR, because it was a big mystery to a Western audience. And here, for one of the first times, it was being opened up by an Anglo-American film. It seemed that the Baltic should be the place to do it because they had very much the same sort of weather, the same sort of materials to build with and all this. So it was a good chance that we could do a decent job shooting it in the Baltic. And so we shot Moscow, in Helsinki, all over the city, and in places outside Helsinki as well. They were very welcoming, the Finns, and it worked very well. I mean, there's a kind of bleakness about the weather which is very much the same as it is in Russia, and so I think that affects people's personalities. So I think, the Finns kind of responded to the book and the atmosphere of the book, so they were very helpful. And, I think they were all as curious as we were to see how the story would unfold and whether we could do a good job telling the story. You never know where the minefields are with these movies, you see. That's the fun of it, or not. I mean, one of the things that did make me laugh watching it is, it was very, very difficult to turn Helsinki into Moscow, or, whatever. And all we really had was control over one roundabout in Helsinki, and we put this big, great picture of Lenin up there on the wall, and the number of times it comes in the film is hilarious. And he was an interesting man. He was quite ill. He had terrible arthritis. His hands were like that, and he would write in longhand. He'd write in very, very neat longhand, the whole thing. But I found him very helpful. I mean, he was terrific, and he was such an interesting man. I mean, I don't know, he died some time after it, but not that long after it. So I was thrilled that I got a chance to work with him because, he is a legend in television writing, whether it's English or American. We needed a movie star to play in it. It was going to be a tough movie to sell. So he was, in fact, very inexperienced in filming and was very much a theatrical person. So it was sort of a challenge in that way, that he wasn't that familiar with the language of film, and I hadn't done that much either, so who am I to talk? But he was carrying the movie, and also we had the problem of what language we were going to play the film in. So I decided that the Russian should speak English and the American should speak American. I mean, Lee Marvin played an American, so he should speak American. Bill Hurt was Russian, so he should speak English. So Bill had to master an English accent, which was tricky, and all the Russians were played by English actors. Bill tended to be very private about it all, very much in the moment, in the space, and the English actors were a little tough on him because of that, which was quite a problem for me, but in a sense the day was saved by Lee. Lee could see, because he had done everything, Lee could see that Bill was carrying the movie. He was in every scene, Bill, and it was his energy that was carrying the movie, and he was being given a rough time by the English actors because of his way of working, you know, his Stanislavski way of working or whatever it was. And so he looked after Bill. It was very touching to me because when I got Lee, Lee was very sick. I mean, we did our first rehearsals in intensive care. You know, he had emphysema. Lee was great to work with. He was everything you wanted him to be. Here was this man with this huge body of work, but who treated everybody the same, treated it as though it was his first film. He was very excited about doing it because here was a character who was articulate, and he'd spent his life doing lots of characters that just grunted and didn't speak, and he was kind of thrilled to have to do dialogue, and really good dialogue, so he was pleased with that. And he just took the whole thing very seriously. He didn't just jet in and, what do you want? I'll do it now and then I'll go off. He became involved in it in a very interesting way. And just to have that body of experience around you and to be able to pick his brains, and he was happy to talk about things, and also to watch him at work. He was good because, you know, he's good fun, and he keeps a sense of humor about what he's doing, and sometimes we were lacking a sense of humor on our set, and he was a really good guy to have, and he and I stayed friendly for many years after that. It's always good to have people on your team that are there for you. You know, whatever goes wrong, they're there for you. And so Brian was one of those. He was a real pillar for me. Well, we felt for the role of the girl, we needed a genuine Russian-sounded voice. We needed that kind of mysteriousness that a European woman could give to the role, although by my logic it should have been played by an English accent. I was at the Cannes Film Festival and I met Roland Polanski. So he gave me her name, and so we followed it up and we brought her to New York. And, you know, it was tough, her English wasn't that good, and so she really had to work on it. And I must have almost re-recorded her to death, looped her to death, but she really did well, and she was a very good actress. I mean, she wasn't just a pretty face. She knew what she was doing, that was a great relief when I discovered that, when I was testing her, that she just wasn't just some babe, that she really was an experienced actress. Ian McDiarmid, was very distinguished theatre actor, so he was well used to it. But, these are all people who were well known in the English stage, and, some, as you say, some came out of this film and went on the natural process to bigger and bigger things. I just liked his youthfulness and the fact his enthusiasm for wanting to do it, and the kind of eclectic knowledge that he had. I mean, he had a lot of information about different cultures of music and whatever like that. So, and I again was very pleased. I thought he gave it a very distinctive sound and made you feel, since you weren't in the place, his was important kind of quality to give it a kind of Russian feel that I needed to have. Well, Paul is great. He's very, very bossy, and he's very, very tough, and he's very brilliant. And I remember he said one great thing to me that I've carried with me my whole working life. He said, our job is to interpret what you say as a great platitude and turn it into something real. So don't try and pretend you're a designer or you're an expert in architect or stuff like that. You tell us what you want and we will figure out what it is. And I've always remembered that when I'm speaking to composers or whatever. Don't try and be a clever dick and pretend that you know as much as they do about it, but tell them honestly in simple language what you want, and it's their job to turn that into something real. And so he was a very profound influence on me, and I remember he gave me the biggest bollocking of any production design I've ever had when he designed a set which had nothing on the walls, a completely bare room. And I thought it didn't have to be a bare room. It wasn't like it was, somewhere where people were beaten up. But I put a picture up. It was a bar, a picture up. And he saw the data and he creamed me. He said, if I don't put it there, I don't want it there. You should not put that thing. I don't know whether we ever reshot it or anything, but again, he could be very tough. But he's great. Ralph Boder, who photographed the film, was a very old and dear friend. He was the person I turned to when I did my first American film. Coal Miner's Daughter, and he guided me through that. We were exactly the same age, and we had children the same age, and so we were kind of bonded together, and you know, wherever I would take him anywhere, wherever we had to go, he would come. And coming to work in the Baltic, you know, with all sorts of language and cultural issues and stuff like that, you know, he was just very flexible. He knew what he wanted, but you know, he could move things around for us if we needed them. And he was just a close friend of mine. And it's always good to have. I mean, I don't think you should always work with the same people, but in a job like that, an editor's job, or you know, a DP or production designer, it's good sometimes to, you know, be able not to have to explain or argue anything, that you know instinctively what you both want. So Ralph, who tragically died quite young, you know, was a really close friend of mine, and so that's why he was there. It's hard to remember, but I remember one thing which kind of, I hope it sounds funny. It was funny, although it was vaguely tragic for us, was at the end of the movie, you know, the whole movie is about sables and these animals that are, it's all about freedom, and the sables are the, as it were, the metaphor for freedom, and there they are in a cage. And the idea is, one of the last images, Renko, Bill Hurt's character, opens the cages and the animals go off to freedom. So we had these real wild sables, and there they were, and my God, we were all tense. You know, they were all going to disappear, and we better make sure we got it in one take, because we weren't going to go in the woods and find them again, and all this sort of stuff. So we were all nervous as hell, and we had all these cameras up there, and then we said action, and they opened the cables, and none of them moved. They didn't want to come out. They were perfectly warm and cozy in the things, and it's very funny if you see the film, because you see, they wouldn't jump out, so they had to be thrown out. So if you study the film carefully, you can see these cages open and these sables come flying through the air. They were all right when they were on the snow running off, but we couldn't get them out of the bloody cages, although we were assured that the only thing they wanted in their life was to get out of these cages. So that's something that I've always looked back, made me laugh, and I sometimes tell that story. You know, I suppose I've done a ton of work all these years, and you can't remember anything. It sounds offhand that I don't remember it, but I truly don't. And sometimes I very, very, very rarely ever go back and look at films, but sometimes if you catch them, you know, sometimes you can't stand to watch them and switch channels, but sometimes you look at it and you think, this wasn't bad, and you know, this kind of worked. And I thought more of Gorky Park worked than I thought perhaps, if I was just to think about it, did work. So I was quite pleased and surprised by it. And as I said, there were great chunks of the story which I had no memory of. So the faceless heads, you know, the faces cut off to remove identification, was a pretty macabre notion and a real challenge to do. And we didn't do a bad job. I mean, we had the sculptures made, so you know, when they froze them and all that sort of thing, it looked vaguely similar, but it was a big job for us to try and make that work. When I saw it, I remembered it, but when it came up, I thought this is a great scene. I mean, the whole idea of it, to have Dennehy there, and then to see this guy take this, you know, designed reconstruction of his brother's face and have it axed in front of him. What a great idea, and I hadn't ever remembered it. But how much can you remember? You know, I can't remember anything anymore, but that's largely because I've got so much in there I can't sort it out. But no, I thought that was a terrific scene, which I had totally forgotten about. There had to be a brutality to it. You know, and so I was a bit, when I saw it recently, I was a bit surprised by that, his guts hanging out and all that sort of stuff. But I thought, I'm glad we went for it. I'm glad we gave the film a hard edge. Yeah, I mean, I read some of the reviews yesterday. You know, you go on Rotten Tomatoes and they post-reviewed them all. And it wasn't bad. I mean, it was better than I thought, because the film, frankly, didn't do that well commercially in America. As I said, it did do well in Europe, but it did poorly, and I'd sort of assumed, looking back on it, that it would have got poor reviews, but it's not true, it didn't. New York Times was raving on about it, and my friend Roger Ebert gave it a very nice review. It got about a 77 in the updated Rotten Tomatoes, which isn't horrible. So I was kind of pleased about that. If you get a chance to see it, see it. I think it's an interesting film. When you see it, it's hard to imagine that no one had ever seen inside Russia before. So the stuff that we were doing was new information to an American audience. And it's a good story, and it's about a period in history that's been forgotten, but in some ways is always with us, that general nervousness we feel about the Soviet Union and Russians and all that. This film represents that. So it still has a value, it still has a resonance today, I think, as much as it did 35 years ago. So I think it's really well worth looking at. As I said, looking at it again, I'm much more pleased with it than I thought I would be. And I'm much more pleased with looking at the actual response it had, going back into the history books and looking to see how it did. So that makes me feel better about it than I did before you asked me to do this interview. And I thought, oh, I can't remember anything about this film. How am I going to talk about it? But seeing it and actually enjoying it and watching it with my 14-year-old son, who said, it's a bit confusing, some of it, but I think it's quite good, which is a big, big thumbs up from him. So, no, I feel, thanks to you, much more warmly about it.
Chief Investigator Renko reporting for duty, Comrade General.